Christina Cola here. Welcome to my second guitar instructional video. My first video on palm harmonics has been getting good response so far, and I'm actually shooting this in response to a question by the YouTube user wetlighter. He asked me, after watching the video, he asked me how I was setting my tone to get the harmonics that I was getting. He says he was having a little trouble with them. And he also asked me if I have my gain all the way up. And I'm going to answer that question. I'm going to talk about tone as it relates to harmonics. I'm going to try to be brief here because tone is a big subject. It's pretty much, isn't it like the second most asked question among guitar players? How do you get a good tone? How do you get that tone? How does Eddie Van Halen get his tone? How does George Lynch get his tone? Second most asked question. The first one is, of course, how do I play really, really fast without having to practice? But I'm not going to be talking about that this time. But what I am going to talk about is, like I said, tone as it relates to harmonics, and this may be, due to time constraints, this may be a two-part video. Now, I'm not going to talk about the specifics of technique and how to approach the harmonics. That's up to you to learn, and I actually might do another video on that. Oh, and I want to mention my rig here is a little bit different, and there's a reason for that. I've got this Ibanez gem. It's a stock gem with the Evolution pickups, and I think the newer ones, they're using rosewood fingerboards now, but mine is ebony. And I'm playing through a Laney HC25R. I'm using this one purposely. It's a smaller amp. It's actually made for a kind of crunchier sound, but it's pretty nice. And I have actually recorded with this amp, and it sounds pretty nice. It sounds pretty good, I think. Now, but the amp is secondary to harmonics. As far as this goes, the first thing you want to focus on when you're going for harmonics, if you're having trouble getting them, is not the amp, it's not the distortion box, it's not the guitar, it's the technique. And that has got to be good before anything else. Because I can get, it doesn't matter if you're doing pick harmonics, natural touch harmonics, like this. It doesn't matter what you're trying to learn with that. Because I can get all of those sounds, all of those harmonics, without the amp. I'm going to cut my volume here, and you probably can't hear this. Maybe a little. But I can hear harmonics all over the place when I do that. Even this. They're really hard to hear. And if you do this unplugged like this, you'll actually hear this note behind the note you're fretting more than you'll hear the harmonics. But they are there. And that's the most important thing. You have to make sure you're getting them on the guitar. Because if you're not getting them on the guitar, obviously they're not going to come through the amp. There's a reason why they're easier to hear with the amp, which I'll get to in a minute. But that's the first thing you want to do when you're trying to perfect your harmonic technique. Practice unplugged. Don't even play clean. Just play completely unplugged. And work on your harmonics. And if you can hear them without the amp, you'll have no trouble getting them with the amp. So just, all of your technique, just listen to it carefully. When those harmonics start popping out, when you're playing unplugged, then you're ready to move on to the next step. Now, as far as the amp goes, now the reason I'm using this HC25 is because of this. Wetlighter asked me if I turn my gain all the way up. And the answer is no, I don't. With some amps I do, with some I don't. And with a tubey sounding kind of, I honestly don't know if this is a tube amp or not. But with an amp that's really good at replicating a tube tone, like for example my PV Trans tube, or if you have a Soldano, which are all tube amps, which I've come to really like lately, you do not need your gain all the way up. And you'll actually lose some of the dynamics and the body of the sound and the clarity when you have the gain all the way up, because then you're just saturating the sound with distortion. And you can lose a lot of things in that. I've played through a few 5150s in the studio where I rehearse, and they've got so much distortion on their lead channel. You've turned it all the way up, you got nothing but noise. I usually, even with a Soldano, I usually keep my gain knob at about half, and I get all the distortion I need. Even with this, I got my distortion a little behind the 8. I got all the distortion I'll need. On the other hand, though, with a really processed amp, like for example a Microcube or a Line 6, and this is, of course, I'm not slamming these type of amps, but I've come to have my bones to pick with them because they get their distortion, a lot of them, from a computer chip. And that is good because they're great for playing in your room because they'll give you all the distortion you need at a low volume. But even at high volume, on stage with a drummer and a bass player, you're not going to be able to hear them because they're lacking in presence because they're so processed. Presence, it's a type of frequency, I'm not really sure how to put it, it's the type of frequency response that will cut through all the other noise on the stage. You don't really get that too much with a very processed distortion. So if I'm using that kind of amp, which I would never use on stage unless you've got a really good PA, then I'll turn my gain all the way up because they're not made to give you better frequency response with lower gain. It's not like you're reducing the saturation on the tubes because there aren't any tubes and turning the gain back. It's just going to give you less distortion, but it's not going to give you any more clarity or fullness or body to the sound the way it will with a tubier sounding amp or a genuine tube amp. So the gain isn't the important thing when it comes to harmonics. What is important though is frequency, which I mentioned. Now frequency, it's another big subject. I'm sure you've all seen those multi-band EQs that have the 40 different sliders, are all going up and down. You don't know what the hell they do. Well, I've had some experience with those and they can be annoying to work with. But to summarize it, basically, the higher the note, the higher the frequency. The lower the note, the lower the frequency. There are a lot of frequencies, there are several frequencies in each note, but a really high note like that has a lot of high frequencies. A low note have a lot of low frequencies. Now, harmonics, especially the really high ones like this, it's one of my favorites, 2nd fret on the G string, it's a high A, that's a really high note. There are a lot of high frequencies in that. So the reason you can hear that clearly with the amp is because all those high frequencies are boosted. And they're boosted for several reasons. One is because your tone settings, and it's also the natural sound of the amp. But even if you can't hear that harmonic through your amp, if you hit it right with your technique, it will be there. And I'll show you what I mean. If I do this, that harmonic is pretty much gone now. And the reason is because all the frequencies in that harmonic are filtered out. What I did was I turned my tone all the way down here, I switched to my neck pickup, and I turned the tone knob on the amp all the way down. That harmonic is there. I can hear it on the guitar, and there's a higher one. But you can't hear it through the amp. So like I said, those frequencies are filtered out. You might actually hear a little bit of the, like a muted open G string. That has to do with, if you watch my other video on palm harmonics, you know that what a harmonic's caused by is the string vibrating in sections along its length, but it's also vibrating along its entire length as well. That's why you get a little bit of that muted low G. But that harmonic is filtered out. But watch, if I do this, there it is. It was there all along, it was just filtered out by the tone. So that's what's going to give you the harmonics as far as your tone settings go. The reason why a lot of distortion can help in some cases is because distortion, naturally, it boosts all your frequencies. That's why it's called gain. It boosts everything. So all those frequencies are more present and riding higher in your sound. That's why if you play with a wah pedal sometimes, if you kick the wah all the way back, it can kill a harmonic. I actually use a Morley Bad Horsey 2, not as a wah pedal, but as a tone filter when I want to just make obnoxious noises with a lot of feedback, overtones, and really high harmonics. I just step on it and hold it down. But I use a Crybaby as my main wah pedal. But anyway, a little tangent there. So what you want to do with your amp as far as bringing out the harmonics is you want to get a sound that's going to lend itself to that, that's going to have all those frequencies boosted in it. Now, you obviously don't want to turn your treble knob all the way up because it's just going to make your sound crap. You're not going to get any chunk for your riffs that way. There is no definite rule of how to set an amp. And you know what, since I'm approaching the time limit here, I'm going to continue in part 2.